Caution, caution. Manual, fuel, manual, fuel.
I'm John Goglia.
I'm Greg Fife.
And I'm Todd Curtis.
And we are the Flight Safety Detectives.
Between us, we have over a century of aviation accident investigation and safety experience to draw on as we discuss issues that affect all of us.
So we are qualified to share our perspectives on accidents and incidents and what can be learned from them for the future.
We're proud to say that we have two sponsors that really relate to the topic of aviation safety: the Professional Aviation Maintenance Association, or PAMA, and Avemco Insurance. Later on in the show, we'll tell you how you can get a 5% discount on your insurance just for listening to the show.
We don't just dissect the official reports. In every episode, we identify safety issues and take the mystery out of accident investigations.
So maybe pilots and their planes can have safer flights ahead.
Welcome once again to the Flight Safety Detectives, our December live show here on December 22nd. And we're pleased to have you with us. And thank you all of you members who have contributed to the point that you can join us in the live show. And please, if you do have questions or comments, send it to us while we're speaking to you. And we're going to start today's show off today by talking about a recent event. As many of you know, late last week, there was a crash in North Carolina involving NASCAR champion driver Greg Biffle, and unfortunately, he and his family, as well as 3 others, were killed. And we actually had a show about that, episode 308, which came out about a day or so ago, where we basically recorded that a few hours after the event, where we added what we could to what was available as far as what were the issues we thought were important and what were the things to look out for. And as some of you can see, many of you can see right now, it was a rather catastrophic event. And the aircraft had an unknown set of problems, took off, attempted to land about 10 minutes later. Unfortunately, it crashed short of the runway and had a considerable fire afterwards. The NTSB did have a couple of press conferences after we made our recording on Friday, and there is still scant factual information as to exactly what happened. So things such as who was actually flying the aircraft has yet to be officially determined by the NTSB. This is an ongoing event. It will very likely be a preliminary report in about 30 days with much more information. And you can expect us to have further commentary about this accident then. But I'd also, at this point, like to introduce John Goglia. John's with us today. Unfortunately, Greg is in the air, and he'll likely not be able to join us live, but we have plenty to talk about.
Well, unfortunately, as you said, the NTSB hasn't released any more information, so we will have to wait for that. But I want to talk a little bit about some of the idiots that we have out there, knowledgeable idiots sometimes, and inconsiderate. So we have one particular guy who's got a decent following, and he has some knowledge, but he's got his head up his ass when it comes to personality. And he just did a whole tirade on this accident and all the way to the probable cause, blaming the pilots based upon his superior flying skills and his knowledge of about all these airplanes. And it's really got under my skin when I watched it. I wish I could attend one of his sessions when he visits airports. I will watch for that, because I'd like to get a piece of his mind, give him a piece of my mind, because he's a real ass for doing what he did. Families of those people on the airplane don't want to hear it from him. They want to hear the official version of what happened and not his pompous ass on his channel telling everybody what happened and blaming the pilot without sufficient information, just his own mind. And he thinks probably he's the greatest pilot. And, I remember when there was a very famous attorney that used to mouth off about pilot error. And then one day he crashed his own airplane, and suddenly he doesn't mouth off anymore. So, not wishing bad on anybody, but karma sometimes comes back and haunts you.
And let me add that sometimes you do get comments from our audience, including on episode 308, to the effect of, why aren't you giving us more? Why aren't you telling us what happened? For the very simple reason that we don't know. Yes, we do speculate, and we usually put a big warning up there saying we're about to speculate about something. But in the very early part of the investigation, it is, as John mentioned, irresponsible to do that level of speculation because the facts simply aren't there. There is, for example, information about the flight. Many of you who use ADSB type services like Flight Radar 24 or ADSB Exchange can actually download and look at the actual flight path of the aircraft. And you can surmise some things from that, but you don't really know what went on in the cockpit. There's also, like I said, a cockpit voice recorder, which is being evaluated as we speak by the NTSB. There's no information on that. And the NTSB did have a press conference where they said there was, in fact, a text message sent out from the plane to one of the relatives on the ground. And he even gave the content of the text message. And to his credit, and I agree with him, he wasn't going to identify who it came from or who it went to because, as he was saying, families are going through a lot right now, and they didn't want to add anything more to the pressure that they're facing. And I had that same message out there to those of you who are, for all the right reasons you think, giving information about this crash. More is better. However, my warning or my advice to anyone looking at those, including us, take it with a grain of salt. We were not on that airplane. We were not part of the investigation. We're basing what we know on what little information is out there. And you probably have the same access to that same small set of information. So whenever someone says something about this accident, take some time, wait, and see what happens when all the information comes out, which could be up to a year and a half.
You're much kinder than I am. I'll call the jerk the jerk.
Now, yes, this is a serious investigation, and it wouldn't make much sense for us to talk more about this now. So we'd like to move on to some of the questions we've had from some of our listeners. And we've had some very good ones. And one of them is from, if I'm not mistaken, at Stratton, who, bear with me for just a moment. Let me make sure I get the background of his question correctly. This is from episode 303, which was about the UPS crash. And he discussed at great length about changes in the media over time and how they, how should I say it, might confuse the issue of what's going on. And for those of you who are looking at our feed, you can see a graphic that gives you an idea of the complexity of the media landscape that's out there. And some of these entities, like Fox News, CNN, etc., John and I have actually been on. And some of the smaller ones you think you're looking at here, we've actually been on those as well. And many of these other ones I actually read. So I'm a consumer of media, and I have to weigh how good or how accurate or how trustworthy these media outlets are. And it can be very confusing for the people that are out there trying to evaluate what's really going on and what's true. And Mr. Stratton, or the Stratton, at the Stratton, had a very long preamble. And the question I saw within there was somewhat more limited. Is corporate-owned media getting in the way of providing the public with useful insights and information? And as a background to that, let me just say that just about every major media that's out there is owned by a corporation or has a corporate type structure behind it. Even what you would think of as nonprofit media, be it National Public Radio or PBS or even like C-SPAN, it has a corporate structure behind it. So yes, corporate media is a reality. You have non-corporate media, of which we are a part. Even though we are not run by a corporation, even though we're not owned by a corporation, we have to deal with the realities of what does it take to get a production out there. And we have to act like a corporation in the sense of we have a budget. We have to go within that budget. We have marketing issues. We have to decide how do we address the needs of our audience while at the same time giving them useful comment. So yes, is it getting in the way? It's making it harder for the viewer, harder for the consumer, simply because there's so many options. Going back, and John, you can chime in on this one, 20 or 30 even.
I've been around a long.
It was nothing like the internet we have now. And many of the news resources that we used were the same news resources we could pretty sure that everyone else was using. You have your major broadcast networks, you have your major newspapers, of which there are a handful, and all the other newspapers in the US at least would sort of key off of these major newspapers. So if the New York Times and the Washington Post said something, they would either reprint the story or say something that is related to what was in the major media. So the landscape, as hard as it was easier to comprehend. Now it's a Wild West show.
Well, today we have uh, public affairs people and government affairs people everywhere. I'm old enough to remember when those departments within all the organizations was oftentimes a one person show. Today we have government affairs people with every federal agency, all over state agencies, all over everywhere, and sometimes they're quite a few, and ones you won't even think of. Many of the lobbyists in Washington that are there supporting industry have their own lobbyists, and they're out massaging the press for stories. Trying to put a good story, a puff press piece, they call it, trying to put an article on TV or in the newspaper that is very complimentary to whatever industry that they're looking to do that for. Also, the same people are in there trying to spin bad stories down, and you can see that with some of what's going on in Washington today. Some of the people who have been in trouble with certain releases of documents from the government, and they have their own spin masters trying to downplay their role or the issue in general. So yes, it's been a really growth industry, public affairs and government affairs throughout every segment of the economy.
And beyond that, the reality we live in now, media reality, is there are a lot of channels out there. Basically, anyone who has a mobile phone or a laptop computer can be an international broadcaster. And as a result, there's a lot of messages out there. And having done this online, essentially since 1996, when I put my first website together, I know what it feels like to be in the shoes of someone who has a message, wants to get it out there, and has a basic issue of how do I get people to look at what I have to say, listen to what I have to say? What tricks do I have to pull to get eyeballs into my content? And yes, some of the things that are done, what I call stupid internet tricks, are irresponsible. And we talked about that at great length. I won't go into that there, but saying things that attract people, which could attract advertising, which is rather enticing, I might say. Having been someone who was making no money off of some of my content, and then one of these days I would get humongous amounts of money from someone who out of the blue said, "Hey, I like what you're doing. I'd like to sponsor you." It can be enticing. What that means is you, the consumer, just have to take care to do so. And by the way, if you have comments about this or anything else we're talking about, please reach out to us. And the address you could use is flightsafetydetectives@gmail.com, and we'd be happy to answer back to you. And we get some very good questions. Sometimes questions that lead to us making episodes around the issues raised by those questions. So please send that content to us.
Yes, you raise a good point, Todd, about the clickbait on the internet. There's an awful lot of clickbait out there today. Just people that want to use words that bring people, click on my site because that's going to get you the hits that you need. And it is tempting. But fortunately, we have avoided that so far. And I hope we can continue on without ever doing that. I mean, just the facts. That's our motto. It's just the facts. And that's why our logo is in black and white, because the facts are in black and white. We don't like to speculate, although sometimes we do and we identify it. But we would never do what this other guy did today. I'll dwell on this because it's really under my skin. But the fact to go and name the probable cause and name the pilot before anyone else, based upon his superior flying skills, and he comes right up to that point to say that, and I just a lot of people say pilots are arrogant. Well, he gets the whammy for that one this week. because what he did was certainly arrogant.
Well, we can move on to, coincidentally, another event which didn't happen last week. It happened, let me get the numbers right, 28 years ago. We're talking about Flight 800. During, as you know, 1996, that was a TWA 747 that exploded a few minutes after takeoff from JFK, and there was a very long investigation. Turns out that John and I were involved in different sides of that investigation. But the question that came up during episode 308 from one of our reviewers was about, TWA. Basic question: do you have doubts about the probable cause of the Flight 800 accident? And again, this is a question from David. Let me get his name right. David Isaacson 9543. Do you have any doubts about the probable cause of the Flight 800 accidents? And the precursor to that, what he was discussing was, there were claims by some of the YouTube creators out there about what downed TWA, a missile, and also claims by the same person about the Air India crash as a cover-up. And John, you can definitely talk about this. We were in the middle of that investigation. I was a safety engineer at Boeing, directly assisting the accident investigation team at Boeing, and Boeing was a party to that investigation. And John, you were on the board at that time, and who was like all of us. We were trying to get to the bottom of what happened. And from my perspective, we went from a situation where shortly after the event, it's like, oh, we have a fairly good idea what this might be. The information came in, the first set of information. Oh, that doesn't work. Well, how about these other secondary things that might have happened? That got blown away. And we were left with nothing. It's like we had no idea in the early part of the investigation what direction to go in to figure out what happened. And John, again, you were on the other side of this, and the pressure had to be heavy on you because we were 3,000 miles away, and we felt the pressure, the public pressure, stories being written about us in newspapers, about our organization in newspapers and such. We were under, as a party, we couldn't say anything to anybody. I literally had started my website 2 weeks before, and I could say nothing about that other than pure factual information. I won't go into it, but I actually worked with Boeing lawyers for weeks before I started my website saying, hey, what are the rules of engagement? Here are the things I will not do. Here's the things I'd like to do. What do you think? And Flight 800 was a test.
Well, I spent an ocean of time in Long Island on that accident, looking at the pieces when they came off the boat. Even to the point, I was so involved in it, even to the point I had my special assistant who stayed up on that accident site for, I forget, 3 years, 2 years, more than 2 years. He stayed with that airplane the whole time. He was my eyes and ears, and I was back and forth constantly. And I brought a lot of subject matter experts in with me, separate from the investigation, as I picked their brain. And I dug into this airplane as deep as anybody could, not only on the investigative side, the official side, but also on the non-official side, and just trying to do it. And I brought in subject matter experts from all the airlines that I could, and internationally that I could. We had a lot of people looking at that because it was just so comprehensive, the investigation. The public docket on that accident has over 50,000 pages in it. And if you can take any of the areas, so if you take the investigation in the cabin and only take pieces of that, you can move the probable cause wherever you want. The real talent is to take all of those information, those bits of information, and like I said, 50,000 pages worth, and dissect them and come up with a conclusion. And when we talked about this show a couple of days ago, and we talked about this 800, Flight 800, you know what? Maybe, Todd, you and I ought to sit down and take those 50,000 pages, and we can go through them, and I can talk to every one of those sections because my nose was in every one of them. You know, I'm a mechanic at heart. All right. And I dig. And the staff in the NTSB knows that because when I started to look for information, they knew what was coming next. It was going to get a detailed view. and people were going to be held accountable for what they said on their reports. I would love to go through them, because if you don't take that in its entirety, you can move it around. And I certainly went into that, and I didn't want the outcome to be what it was. I was hoping it was going to be something else. And I worked and worked, and it wasn't. And everybody that talks about the missile that keeps coming up, the missile, and that's pure bunk, because missiles today don't hit the airplanes. They explode near the airplane. And that means you're going to have a lot of holes in the airplane. And there isn't. There's over 1 million pieces to that puzzle, to that picture that you just put up on the screen. The FBI and the Navy and our people brought up 1 million pieces of debris for that airplane, and every one of them was examined. And one of the things that nobody ever includes, all these people that say it was conspiracy or blah, 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 all of them never touch the sequence of the break up of the airplane. And I have pictures to show that. And maybe we ought to just go through that. I have a whole slideshow that I do on TWA 800. And I have people in the audience that said there was a missile. And at the end of that slideshow, they're quiet.
At the risk of going over on this section, which I think we already have, I'll add one little piece that was only slightly humorous, only after the fact. I'm at work one day during the investigation. My boss comes around the corner really quickly, sees me and says, asks me a question, Todd, can you tell me the probability that a meteor took out the airplane? And my first thought was, he's kidding. My second thought was, my boss flew F-4s in Vietnam. He doesn't kid like that. He was really serious about it. And I took several days to come up with a mathematically sound analysis of the likelihood of this happening. I won't go into the details, but the likelihood was very low, and it satisfied a question that we had about that. And I understand, and we'll talk about this in the next show you just mentioned, John. I believe you are the person who was the catalyst for that question, but we'll leave that as a teaser and move on to the next part of our show. By the way, we don't believe in any of the conspiracy theories about Flight 800. I have a strong, I strongly agree with the conclusions of the accident investigation. And again, we'll go into that in a completely different show. Moving on, we'd like to talk about a question that came up from episode 303. This is another episode that talked about the UPS event. And the question was from Scott-DJ, and who said he was waiting for us to get our perspective on the accident. By the way, we took some time before we did our first UPS show because, again, we like to go with the facts and only talk about them when we have something to say. And he said something that was very similar to what I've seen repeatedly, that it looked eerily similar to the 1979 American Airlines Flight 191 event in Chicago, which has that famous picture. And his question was, is the accident in Louisville another American 191 in Chicago? Is this deja vu? Both events involved a derivative of the DC-10. The one in Chicago was an earlier model of the DC-10. The one in Louisville was an MD-11, which was a more advanced model of the DC-10. In both cases, there was an engine, the left engine, which separated from the wing of the aircraft shortly before the aircraft crashed. And again, there are similarities there, but there are so many differences between those two that it's hard to say, especially since we only have the preliminary report from the Louisville event. It's hard to say that there were a lot of parallels between these two, other than the obvious. And the picture you all are looking at is a famous picture. It was taken from an observation deck at Chicago by a passenger who just happened to be taking pictures that day. And it clearly showed what was going on with that aircraft. And unlike the one in Louisville, this aircraft was actually able to climb several hundred feet before hydraulic issues and other issues led to a loss of control. Whereas the Louisville event, it was able to rise up, I believe, less than 200 feet from the ground, struggled to go roughly a half mile or so before it struck first a building and then struck other structures on the ground, killing, unfortunately, in both cases, everyone on board and people on the ground.
You know, this is just another example of a very complicated event that people are jumping to conclusions in. We need to wait. We don't know but a scratch of information compared to what is going to come out. So again, we have to wait until the NTSB releases factual data, not opinion.
I'd like to take a moment here to thank a couple of our new members. We have at John Lindy 5822 at the plane watcher level, and at William Palmer 9858 at the flight safety insider level. Thank you again for joining, and we really appreciate you making the effort to contribute to what we're doing here. We're also working on giving other benefits to members, including things beyond access to the live shows. And we'd like to have you contribute as well. Give us some responses on the shows itself. Leave your comments on the videos. Send us email questions, not just for members, but for all of those who join us here at the Flight Safety Detectives. Please give us some feedback as to what you would like to see us do to make sure that our special members are getting a satisfactory return on their investment, not just of the money, much more importantly, the investment of your time. We like to give useful information. We don't like to waste your time. We'd like to make you feel that your time spent with us, your energy spent with us, is fulfilling and educational.
Well, I know a lot of people are frustrated when they talk to us and some others about waiting for the NTSB, waiting for the factual information. But that's the only thing you can do. There's a level of fairness in here. You don't jump to a conclusion just because you might know or think you know more than anyone else. It's just not right. You have to wait for the factual information. And maybe that's my background. You know, a mechanic doesn't jump without doing a little troubleshooting. The NTSB doesn't jump until they gather all the facts, put them together, and then spend a long time trying to put them together and follow the breadcrumbs, so to speak, down the trail. That means you have to explore all the trails to figure out the right one. And it takes time. And in today's environment, everybody wants instant answers. That's what we got from the 24-hour news cycle. And that's why we get so much bad information out of the news media. You know, I can remember 30 years ago, or more than 30 years ago, that the reporters like Lisa Stark and Bob Orr and Hager on NBC, these reporters would not put anything on the air until they verified it. Now, even from somebody like me who was deeply involved in it, they went for verification before they put it on the air. Once this 24-hour news cycle really caught on, now the competition is to get something on the air as quickly as you can. And I think it's doing us all a disservice because it's never the whole story. And there's always pieces missing or added that should not have been added. So it's, you know, I don't care if people get frustrated with us. We're going to try to stay as focused as we can on just the facts. Just the facts. And then we'll give you our opinion on them. But the facts need to be solid before we start putting our opinion on anything.
And we'd like to move on to another show that we did recently where the facts did matter. I personally came in with an idea ahead of time. Ooh, these are 3 different events, all involving the same airline. Gee, is there something going on with this airline? Is there some connection between the 3? Well, what we ended up focusing on was something entirely different, bring up a completely different point. And this was episode 305. This is one where we looked at a rash of Endeavor airline ground incidents. Both it was Atlanta, New York, and also the crash in Toronto. And what we were looking at specifically is the one in Atlanta, where one airplane was waiting for takeoff. They had a spot on the runway they were waiting. And from the looks of it, if you look at the graphic overhead, it's like, why? Why is this airplane parked so far back from the hold short line? Well, as Greg explained in episode 305, there's no rule that says you have to be right up next to the hold short line. That airplane that was sitting there was perfectly in their right to be where they were. It was the airplane that was taxiing behind it, where for a variety of reasons, which they are still going through that accident, a variety of reasons, the people in that cockpit, 2 of them, possibly possibly had their attention misdirected from the airplane in front of them, and the wingtip hit the back of the airplane. Unfortunately, no one was hurt seriously. But it did bring up an interesting question from one of our readers. This is from Steve Straczynski, SY8CJ, who asked the following question. Let me get the following question that he asked. We talked about the CRJ, which was a regional aircraft, which was waiting at the hold short line, was not that long of aircraft. What would have happened if they had an extra long aircraft? And he went into further detail. And inside of that, I saw the question, should there be changes to the striping or procedures to help prevent collisions during taxi operations? And as we explained in the show, there are rules in place that have been for a long time for how operations should be handled in a situation like that. And it was up to the responsibility of the aircraft that was moving to see and avoid, much like the responsibility you would see in a nautical situation, a boat or a ship that's stationary and a boat or ship that's moving. The one that's moving is in a position to maneuver. The one that's moving should have the responsibility to plan to avoid a collision.
Signage at the airport, all airports, the FAA has rules. It's a big problem. We have runway incursions at some airports and some locations on those airports that just occur regularly. And it's very frustrating to have those. And I have the opportunity to look at a number of those. It's very frustrating to look at them, but the signage needs to be a standard signage everywhere. Like we say, English is the language of aviation. We need to have signage everywhere airports are that is consistent in the message that it gives. And yeah, sometimes we get caught up like we just did with this one. Yes, if he had pulled up a little bit more, it would have been okay. What if he had pulled up a little bit more and the airplane on the runway hit him? Wingtip. I mean, there's all these pieces that come together with the airport movements. But the one common denominator that everybody that's moving an airplane has to pay attention to is situation. Situational awareness. And, I'm sure people are sick of hearing that, but it comes up over and over and over again because we get in a routine, and maybe your home airport is pretty loose and open and not with a lot of traffic. And then you get in an airport like this at Atlanta, where it's pretty damn busy at times of the day. And you've got to really be on your game. And, I saw where there may have been a distraction on the other side that took the pilot's attention to the left instead of to the right. But you can't lose sight of the fact that they couldn't see their wingtips no matter what. And they were on the center line. So there's a lot of pieces to that puzzle. I don't know where it's going to come out yet, but here we go again. How do you blame one pilot or the other until you know all the facts? And we don't know all the facts. We know that he was on the center line. We know that the position of the airplane that had the tail strike, and we know that there was something diverting the attention of the pilot. That's all we know. The rest of it hasn't come out yet, and we need to wait to find the rest of it, because one little tidbit can change the whole story in this case. So just the facts. We deal with just the facts.
And this gives me an opportunity to circle back to a subject we've talked about several times during the show, the role of the media. Rather than corporate media, I'd like to focus on non-corporate media, your content creators, your folks on TikTok, which I personally don't do, or YouTube, which I personally do, and all the other social media outlets that are out there. Simply put, social media allows an individual to have a global audience, something that when I was a teenager could only be done by the largest of corporations or by national governments. Now that power is within your hands. As those of you who are looking at the graphic are showing, Facebook, YouTube, WhatsApp, Instagram, TikTok, all of these have not millions, but billions of people who are using these platforms. And you have Facebook, where, according to estimates, 2/3 of the world has access to it. In the US, YouTube is accessible to 73% of the population. YouTube is so popular that NFL games are now being broadcast on it. When I first saw YouTube, the idea that the most popular television shows in the country would somehow move to the social media platform was ludicrous 10 or 15 years ago. Fast forward to today. And from episode 304, we actually had a question from Randy C4551 that spoke to this. And this question was very simply, what are the key things to keep in mind when dealing with the modern media environment, including the role of independent content creators as news providers? Uh, Personal point here, I basically, for 30 years, I've been one of those content providers. And very few years after I started, I was also straddling the line between independent content creator and talking head on television, which was a kind of a wild thing for someone who had, in my opinion, back then, none of the credentials that people on TV had. I was not the head of an airline. I was not a 4-star or 3-star general. I wasn't an elected politician. I was an engineer with an interest in aviation and happened to have a very tiny platform. And don't know how it happened, but I got recognized by a national news media organization in 1999. I had my first shot at going on television. And I'll say this, the thing that made me happy about that was calling up my parents saying, hey, Mom, Dad, I'm going to be on TV on this channel in like 5 minutes. You can see me do my thing. That was the thing that made me happiest, because my real reason for doing so was to provide useful information to the public about what I know best. Now, there are many who are out there right now who have that as their ongoing goal. And even those who are extremely well versed as a professional, very knowledgeable about the subject, let's just say that it's a learning process. Sometimes they put out stuff that make me pull my hair out. Other times it's like that same person might put out something fantastic. I'll mention someone in particular. There's one person, very huge following, called Captain Steve. He had a show about the recent 777 event where there was an engine failure at takeoff, and they came around and landed at Dulles. There was no one hurt. But he went chapter and verse through what was happening, why it was happening. He himself admitted he was a 777 pilot. I used to work on the 777 program at Boeing, and I really enjoyed that show. I had no issues with it. Now, that same person on another show, I might have some issues with what they do. Sometimes I have issues with what we do after the fact, where I say to myself, how can we make that better? So, in answer to your question, one of the things you have to keep in mind, one, is this someone who can justify saying that they know what they're talking about? Two, are they being responsible in how they're doing it? Three, if they make a mistake, are they going to admit it? Four, if they're giving opinions, are they going to be clear about it? Those are just 4 basic things I would add. And John, you probably have a few more things to add. What should people look for in these independent content creators?
The source of the material. If it's not coming, in the case of an accident, within the first 30 days, you can't put opinion in there. It's got to be based on what the NTSB releases or the FAA releases, and not anything else. And I was laughing a bit, Todd, when you were talking about that. Do you remember the days when we used to be sitting in adjacent studios doing different?
Oh, yeah. We showed up to the same studio in Boston back in the days before we had, at-home studios. We'd have to go to a place that was rented out by the networks from all over. So CNN, MSNBC, they would use the same studio. And sometimes we run into each other in Boston talking about the same story. That doesn't happen as much anymore, in fact, because instead of being dozens of people who show up on TV again and again, there are literally thousands who could show up on local TV, national TV, international TV. And it is how should I say it, a marketplace of ideas where the level of ideas, the quality of ideas are somehow diluted in many cases. But I won't go into that because I came up in one era of social media and took advantage of it. Those who are in this era of social media are taking advantage of it in a different way. And the tools and techniques that I used literally 25 years ago are a world of difference from what is being used right now. And there might be thousands of people doing it versus dozens. Some of them will rise to the top and will probably end up being very influential people talking about this and other subjects in years to come. My hat's off to the folks who are trying. My hat's off twice to the folks who are succeeding. In the meantime, you, the consumer, have to be careful about who you're listening to. And even if they do things that are a little weird that you think, why are they doing this? For example, using AI generated voices and such, as opposed to putting themselves on in front of the camera. I'll excuse that if they learn their lesson and realize that yes, AI has its place, but its place isn't replacing actual thoughtful research with having the AI read a text document and spit out a summary of it without you doing any editing. Okay, I'm off my soapbox now.
Yeah, we got in a lot of. I teach school, and we got in a lot of students in trouble for doing that. So
And we would like to move on to something that from episode 305 from at Stephanie had a very good idea or very good suggestion. This was about why don't we put someone from the NTSB on? Let me back up a little bit. You know, he was mentioning as former NTSB investigators. Full disclosure, I was not an NTSB investigator. Greg was. John was a board member. I was someone who was in the business, but I never had a formal relationship with NTSB. Can't you guys contact NTSB principal investigators to bring up the issues discussed in this video? The question I saw in there is, why don't you invite the NTSB chair or an NTSB investigator to be on the show? Personally, I'd love to do that. But John, what are the issues that might prevent that from happening?
well, the investigator, they have to be careful, but we can get the board members. In fact, I had a discussion with a board member a week and a half ago, 10 days ago. I was in D.C. At an event, and many of the NTSB folks were there as well. And I had that discussion, and that's in the works to have one of the board members come on the show. But they can't really talk about investigations that are ongoing right now, but we can talk about previous investigations. The board member has the freedom to say whatever he wants within limits on existing current investigations. But on past, if you have an IIC investigator in charge, he has to be more delicate because he doesn't have the latitude to say just anything he wants. So,
Had I known this 20 some odd years ago, I would have gone directly after a board member and asked them to be on my very, very tiny podcast at that point. They would have probably told me no, but at least I would have been bold enough to try. And that's good information. And this is true throughout aviation. There's some insiders who can talk to the public or talk somewhat openly, others who will not say anything, not just during the course of the investigation, but for years and decades afterwards, because there are considerations here. There is proprietary information that may not be legally released, and to release that information to the public, to violate your sources by doing that, would be irresponsible, to put it mildly.
yeah, you raise a good point with the information. So I can tell you that in many, many accidents, when I was at the board, we had information, design standards, design criteria, just things that are very, very commercially sensitive to a manufacturer that they don't see the public. Not that they're trying to hide anything, because they would disclose it all to the NTSB, but they asked that it don't get put out in the public because it really is a secret. You know, the shape of their wings, the shape of how they attach them to the airplane. There's pieces in there that they consider to be trade secrets, and the NTSB would have to keep those. Staff, like the investigator in charge, the rest of them, have to really be careful that they don't step out on the limb and talk about that, because that could be career ending. So the board member can step out and get his hand slapped, but the staff would get more than a hand slap.
Well, at this point, I'd like to say again what I say often during our shows. The time went so quickly. We were able to get through a few questions, and we thank you again for those questions. And we invite you to email more questions to us, flightsafetydetectives@gmail.com. And if we didn't get your questions answered today, please send us an email. We'll answer those questions later. We'd also like to do a shout out to our sponsors, especially to Avemco Insurance, which insures general aviation aircraft all over, including pilots like myself. I don't own an aircraft, but I have renter's insurance with Avemco, have been with them for years, and they've been very good to me, even without them sponsoring on the show, because it's good to have a partner who cares about aviation safety like Avemco. Good to have a partner who encourages you to learn more. They actually give a discount if you take things like some of the online FAA safety courses. And they will give you a discount if you mention our show, Flight Safety Detectives, when you contact them. So even if you have insurance already, please check out Avemco.
As I spent time at their facility, and I actually sat with the people when they were talking to their customers, and they fly, and their only business is aviation. And boy, does it make a difference. Because I've seen and heard of insurance companies, agents, that have automotive, they have real estate, they have all the lines, right? And aviation is just a piece of those lines. And they're not specialized enough, and many of the questions have to be referred to somebody else. Avemco, they're right there. And they all fly, and they actually have a simulator right on their facility. You can go play with this simulator. And they all fly the simulator. So it's a pretty good deal. Now, like everyone else, we need sponsors to support the show. So if you'd like to be a sponsor, please get a hold of us, and we can talk about all kinds of creative ways to help you get your message out using our show as a vehicle. And we're more than reasonable in what we do and the way we handle it, and we have fun. We have fun with it all. So you can send an email to us. It was just on the screen, and we will respond to you.
Please subscribe to the channel at YouTube. Give us likes, send comments, share our content with others. This is something where we enjoy doing what we do, and we'd like to have more people have the experience of our knowledge and insights, and occasionally our humor, but mostly our knowledge and insights. So please subscribe and like and comment and share, and make this a healthier channel for everyone. Thank you again for your time.